The howling wind rattled the stagecoach with such ferocity that Theodora Campbell was certain the entire vehicle would overturn at any moment. She gripped the leather strap hanging from the ceiling as the coach lurched violently over another drift of snow, sending her shoulder crashing into the window. The glass was frosted with ice crystals that had formed intricate patterns, transforming what should have been a view of the Nevada wilderness into a kaleidoscope of white and gray. It was January of 1869, and Thea, to those who knew her, had been traveling for 3 days from San Francisco to Kingston, Nevada. What should have been a 2-day journey had stretched interminably as the blizzard descended upon them, forcing slower progress with each passing hour. "Miss Campbell, I do believe we should have heeded the warnings back in Carson City," said Mrs. Abernathy, the plump widow seated across from Thea. Her face was pale with worry, the lines around her mouth deepening as she clutched her reticule tightly to her chest. "I'm beginning to think you're right," Thea replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing fear. The driver shouted something unintelligible, and the coach jerked again. Through the frosted glass, Thea could barely make out the silhouettes of the driver and shotgun messenger on the box, their forms hunched against the driving snow, beside Mrs. Abernathy sat Mr. Hollister, a banker traveling to Kingston on business, his usual pompous demeanor replaced by genuine alarm as he braced himself against the wall of the coach. The fourth passenger, a young mining engineer named Mr. Porter, had his eyes closed, lips moving in what appeared to be silent prayer. "We're going too fast for these conditions," Thea said, her heart hammering as the coach slid sideways for a terrifying moment before the wheels found purchase again. The violent motion threw her against the window once more, and this time she heard a distinct crack. Looking up, she saw a spider web of fractures spreading across the glass above her head. "God help us," whispered Mrs. Abernathy. The driver's shouts grew more urgent, and Thea felt the coach begin to tilt. There was a sickening moment of suspension before gravity took hold. "Hold on," she cried, just as the world turned sideways. The crash was deafening. The coach rolled once, twice, before coming to rest on its side. Thea found herself thrown to what had been the side of the coach but was now the floor. Pain shot through her left arm, and something warm trickled down her forehead. Disoriented, she tried to make sense of the tangle of limbs and luggage. Mrs. Abernathy was moaning softly, while Mr. Hollister appeared to be unconscious, a gash visible on his temple. Mr. Porter was awkwardly pinned beneath an overturned trunk. "Is everyone alive?" Thea called, wincing as she pulled herself to her knees. "I think my ankle is broken," Mrs. Abernathy whimpered. Mr. Porter groaned. "I'm trapped, but I believe nothing's broken." Outside, the horses were whinnying in distress. There was no sound from the driver or the messenger. Thea reached for the door handle, which was now positioned above her head, but it wouldn't budge. The frame had been warped in the crash. "We're trapped," she announced, trying to keep panic from her voice. "The door won't open." The blizzard howled around them, the wind finding every crack and crevice in the damaged coach, bringing with it tiny needles of snow and ice. The temperature was dropping rapidly. "We'll freeze to death," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice breaking. Thea removed her heavy wool cloak and draped it over the older woman. "No, we won't. Someone will find us." But even as she spoke the reassuring words, Thea knew the chances were slim. They were miles from Kingston, in the middle of a blizzard, in a stagecoach that had rolled off the main trail. The likelihood of anyone finding them before the cold claimed their lives was virtually non-existent. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time seemed to stretch and distort in the freezing coach. The daylight was fading, the interior growing dimmer. Mr. Porter had managed to free himself and was now tending to Mr. Hollister, who had regained consciousness but was clearly concussed. Thea's fingers and toes had gone numb, and her thoughts were becoming sluggish. She knew this was a dangerous sign. Forcing herself to move, she began rummaging through the scattered luggage for anything that might help them stay warm. "We need to keep moving," she told the others, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "We can't fall asleep." A sudden thud on the roof, now the side of the coach, made everyone start, then another and another. It sounded like someone was walking on the overturned vehicle. "Hello?" Thea called, her voice cracking from the cold. "Is someone there? Help us." There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of a man's voice. "Anyone alive in there?" "Yes," Thea shouted, new energy surging through her. "There are 4 of us. The door is jammed." "Stand back from the windows," the voice commanded. Thea scrambled away from the window nearest to her, pulling Mrs. Abernathy with her as best she could. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of breaking glass as the butt of a rifle smashed through the window farthest from the ground. Snow and icy air rushed in, but Thea had never been so happy to feel the bitter cold. A gloved hand reached through the broken window, clearing away the jagged shards. "Ladies first," the voice said. "Hurry now, this storm's getting worse." Thea helped Mrs. Abernathy toward the window. "She's injured her ankle," Thea called to their rescuer. A face appeared at the window, a man with several days' worth of beard, a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes, and a bandana covering the lower half of his face. All Thea could see clearly were his eyes, startlingly blue against his weather-beaten skin. "Pass her up to me," he instructed. With Mr. Porter's help, Thea managed to lift Mrs. Abernathy toward the window. The cowboy reached in, his strong arms grasping the older woman beneath her shoulders, and with surprising gentleness pulled her through the opening. "You next, miss," he called a moment later. Thea approached the window, uncertain how she would fit through the narrow opening. The cowboy reached down, his hands finding her waist. "Grab my arms," he instructed. She did as she was told, grasping his forearms. With a strength that left her breathless, he pulled her through the window in one fluid motion. For a moment she was suspended in his grip, face to face with her rescuer, those blue eyes studying her intently before he carefully set her on her feet in the snow. "Thank you," she gasped, the cold air burning her lungs. He nodded once, then turned back to the stagecoach. "How many more?" He called down. "2 men," Thea answered, wrapping her arms around herself. Without her cloak, the biting cold cut through her traveling dress like knives. The cowboy pulled Mr. Porter out next, then Mr. Hollister, who was barely conscious. The driver and messenger. Thea asked, dreading the answer. The cowboy shook his head grimly. "Didn't make it. Must have been thrown when the coach went over." Thea closed her eyes briefly, saying a silent prayer for the men. When she opened them, the cowboy had removed his heavy duster and was draping it around her shoulders. "No, I couldn't," she began, but he cut her off. "You'll freeze to death otherwise. I've got layers." The coat was warm from his body, and Thea clutched it gratefully around herself. "What about the others?" "Got blankets on my horse," he said, nodding toward a sturdy bay gelding standing patiently nearby, steam rising from its nostrils in the frigid air. "But we can't stay here. My cabin's about 2 miles east. Think you can make it?" Thea looked at Mrs. Abernathy, who could barely stand, and Mr. Hollister, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. "We'll have to," she said firmly. The cowboy, Thea realized she still didn't know his name, nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. I'm Finn Abbott, Theodora Campbell," she replied. "And thank you for saving our lives, Mr. Abbott." "Finn," he corrected, pulling down his bandana to reveal a strong jaw and unexpectedly full lips that quirked up at one corner. "Just Finn." He turned to retrieve the blankets from his saddlebags, and Thea found herself studying him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his movements efficient and purposeful. Despite the dire circumstances, or perhaps because of them, she felt an inexplicable sense of safety in his presence. The journey to Finn's cabin was arduous. He fashioned a makeshift sled from pine boughs for Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Hollister, which he pulled behind his horse. Thea and Mr. Porter walked alongside, each step a battle against the deepening snow and howling wind. By the time the cabin came into view, a sturdy log structure nestled against a stand of pines. Thea's legs were trembling with exhaustion. Smoke curled from the chimney, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. "Almost there," Finn encouraged, his voice barely audible over the storm. Inside, the cabin was blessedly warm, heated by a cast-iron stove that dominated one wall. It was a simple dwelling, one large room with a sleeping area curtained off in one corner, a table and chairs, and a few shelves holding supplies. But to Thea, at that moment, it was more welcoming than the finest hotel in San Francisco. Finn helped Mrs. Abernathy to the single armchair by the stove, then assisted Mr. Porter in getting Mr. Hollister onto the bed. "I'll need to check that head wound," Finn said, examining Mr. Hollister's injury with practiced hands, "and set Mrs. Abernathy's ankle." "You have medical training?" Thea asked, surprised. Finn shrugged. "Army surgeon patched me up more times than I care to remember during the war." Learned a thing or two watching him work. He moved with quiet efficiency, cleaning Mr. Hollister's wound, binding Mrs. Abernathy's ankle, and checking Mr. Porter for injuries. When he finally turned to Thea, his expression softened slightly. "Your turn," he said, gesturing to a cut on her forehead she'd forgotten about in the chaos. She sat in the chair he pulled out for her, trying not to wince as he cleaned the cut with a cloth soaked in whiskey. "It's not deep," he said, his face close to hers as he worked. "Won't even scar." His proximity was unsettling in a way Thea couldn't quite define. She found herself noticing details: a small scar at the corner of his right eye, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, the careful precision of his hands despite their roughness. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. 3 years, since the war ended. "Alone," his expression shuddered briefly. "Just me and the horses." He finished tending to her cut and stood, moving away as if he'd suddenly remembered the others in the room. "You folks must be hungry. I've got stew on the stove." As Finn served them bowls of surprisingly flavorful venison stew, Thea found her gaze returning to him repeatedly. There was something compelling about this man who lived alone in the wilderness, who had risked his life to save strangers in a blizzard. "How did you find us?" she asked as they ate. Finn settled back in his chair, cradling a mug of coffee. "Was tracking a wolf that's been bothering my horses. Trail led me near the stage road, heard the commotion when your coach went over." "Providence," Mrs. Abernathy declared, her color somewhat restored by the warmth and food. "The Lord sent you to us, Mr. Abbott." Finn's expression suggested he didn't share the older woman's view, but he merely nodded politely. "How far are we from Kingston?" Mr. Porter asked, setting aside his empty bowl. "About 15 miles as the crow flies, more by road." Thea's heart sank. Her uncle was expecting her in Kingston, but there was no way they could travel that distance in this weather, especially with Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Hollister injured. As if reading her thoughts, Finn said, "Storm's supposed to break tomorrow afternoon. Should be able to get you folks to Kingston day after tomorrow if the roads aren't too drifted." "We cannot impose on your hospitality for that long," Mrs. Abernathy protested weakly. Finn's mouth quirked in that almost smile again. "Madam, unless you've got wings hidden under that shawl, you're not going anywhere till this storm passes." The sleeping arrangements were necessarily intimate. Mrs. Abernathy took the bed, with Mr. Hollister, who needed to be monitored for his head injury, on a pallet beside it. Mr. Porter claimed a spot near the stove, and Finn insisted Thea take his bedroll near the warmest corner of the cabin. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, uncomfortable with displacing him. "I'll keep watch," he said simply, settling into the chair by the window. Despite her exhaustion, Thea found sleep elusive. The events of the day played through her mind on an endless loop: the crash, the terror of being trapped, the moment Finn's hands had gripped her waist and pulled her to safety. Eventually, the rhythmic sound of the others' breathing and the occasional crackle of the stove lulled her into a fitful slumber. She woke once in the night to find Finn still in the chair, his profile illuminated by the faint light from the stove. He was staring out at the storm, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought she saw a profound loneliness in the set of his shoulders, but then he turned, sensing her gaze. Their eyes met across the darkened room, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared solitude. Finn nodded slightly, as if acknowledging whatever had just transpired, and Thea closed her eyes, drifting back to sleep with the strange certainty that she was safe as long as he was there. The storm raged through the night and well into the next day, just as Finn had predicted. Confined to the cabin, the unlikely group found ways to pass the time. Mrs. Abernathy, despite her injury, insisted on taking over cooking duties, declaring that it was the least she could do to repay their host's kindness. Mr. Porter engaged Finn in a lengthy discussion about the mining operations around Kingston, revealing a depth of knowledge that impressed even the taciturn Cowboy. Mr. Hollister remained quiet, nursing a pounding headache from his concussion, but seemed to be improving steadily under Finn's surprisingly competent care. Thea found herself watching Finn whenever she thought he wouldn't notice. There was something fascinating about the way he moved, the economy of his gestures, the quiet authority he exuded without seeming to try. He wasn't conventionally handsome, his features were too weathered, his expression too guarded for that, but there was an undeniable attractiveness to his self-sufficiency and calm competence. As the day wore on, she noticed him watching her too. Quick glances when he thought she was occupied, his blue eyes assessing and curious. Once their gazes locked for a moment too long, and Thea felt a flush creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. In the late afternoon, Finn pulled on his coat. "Need to check on the horses," he said, heading for the door, "and see if the snow's letting up." "I'll come with you," Thea said impulsively, reaching for her own coat, or rather Finn's duster, which he'd insisted she keep using. Finn hesitated, then nodded. "Bundle up. It's still fierce out there." The blast of cold air that hit them as they stepped outside took Thea's breath away. The snow was falling less heavily now, but the wind still drove the flakes horizontally across the small clearing where the cabin stood. Finn took her elbow, guiding her toward a sturdy log structure that served as a stable. Inside, the air was noticeably warmer, filled with the comforting smell of hay and horses. 3 animals occupied the stalls: Finn's bay gelding, a dappled mare, and a younger horse that whinnied a greeting as they entered. "This is quite an operation for a man living alone," Thea observed as Finn began checking on the animals. He shrugged, running a hand down the mare's neck. "Horses need tending whether there's 1 or 20 of them." "Is this your livelihood, raising horses?" "I do some breaking and training, sell a few foals each year, hunt, trap a little in winter." He glanced at her. "Not as grand as what you're used to in San Francisco, I expect." Thea leaned against a post, watching him work. "And what makes you think I'm used to grand things?" Finn continued brushing the mare, but one corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Your clothes, for one. Fine wool, good stitching. The way you hold yourself, the way you talk." "I could say the same about you," she countered. "You don't speak like most cowboys I've encountered." He paused, giving her a considering look. "Had some schooling before the war." "The war changed many things for many people," Thea said quietly. Finn's expression closed off and he turned back to the horses. "That it did." Sensing she'd touched a nerve, Thea changed the subject. "What brought you to Nevada?" "Space," he said simply. "Wanted somewhere I could breathe." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Finn tending to the horses while Thea helped by carrying water from the barrel in the corner. As she passed him a bucket, their fingers brushed, and Thea felt that same inexplicable awareness she'd experienced when he pulled her from the stagecoach. "Why were you heading to Kingston?" Finn asked, breaking the silence. "My uncle lives there. He's the town doctor. After my father died last year, he offered me a place to stay, said he could use help with his practice." "You have medical training?" Finn asked, echoing her earlier question to him. Thea smiled wryly. "Not formally, but I assisted my father for years. He was a physician in San Francisco." Finn nodded thoughtfully. "A lady doctor, that's something?" "Not a doctor," Thea corrected quickly. "Just an assistant, for now," Finn said with surprising insight. They finished the chores and stepped back outside. The wind had died down considerably, and the snow was now falling in large, lazy flakes that settled gently on Thea's eyelashes and hair. "Storm's breaking," Finn observed, looking up at the sky. "Should be clear by morning." Thea felt a curious pang at the realization that their time in the cabin was coming to an end. "That's good," she said, not entirely convincingly. Finn looked at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. For a moment, Thea thought he might say something, but instead he simply nodded toward the cabin. Should get back inside before you catch your death. The evening passed pleasantly enough. Mrs. Abernathy had somehow managed to bake biscuits in Finn's battered cast iron skillet, and they enjoyed them with the last of the venison stew. Mr. Hollister was well enough to join them at the table, and the conversation flowed more easily than it had the previous night. Thea noticed that Finn, though still reserved, seemed more relaxed. He even shared a few stories about his horses, his eyes lighting up when he spoke of the young colt he was training. As the others prepared for sleep, Thea lingered by the stove, reluctant to end what might be their last evening together. Finn joined her, offering a mug of coffee. "Thank you," she said, accepting it gratefully. "For everything, you saved our lives." Finn shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Thea said firmly. "Not anyone would have ridden out in that storm, broken into a crashed stagecoach, and taken in 4 strangers." He didn't respond, but his eyes, when they met hers, held something that made her breath catch. "Will you tell me something true about yourself, Finn Abbott?" she asked impulsively. Something most people don't know. He was quiet for so long that Thea thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, he said, "I write poetry." Of all the things she might have expected, this wasn't one of them. "Poetry?" he nodded, looking almost sheepish. "Not good poetry, mind you, just thoughts about the mountains, the seasons, the way light changes on the snow." Thea felt something shift inside her, a warmth spreading that had nothing to do with the fire. "I'd like to read it someday." Finn's eyes, when they met hers, were intense. "Would you?" "Yes," she said simply. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then Mrs. Abernathy called from the bed, asking if Thea could help her adjust her pillows, and the spell was broken. "Good night, Finn," Thea said softly, reluctantly moving away. "Good night, Theodora," he replied, and the sound of her full name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. True to Finn's prediction, the morning dawned clear and bright, the world transformed into a dazzling expanse of untouched white. After a breakfast of johnnycakes and coffee, Finn announced it was time to prepare for the journey to Kingston. "Roads will be drifted," he said, pulling on his coat. "But I know a route through the hills that should be passable. We'll need to leave soon to make it before dark." Thea felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. The prospect of reaching Kingston, which had been her goal for so long, now filled her with a strange reluctance. In just 2 days, this cabin, and more significantly, its owner, had come to feel familiar in a way that surprised her. Finn hitched his 2 strongest horses to a sturdy sleigh he kept for winter travel. Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Hollister were settled comfortably in the back, wrapped in blankets, while Mr. Porter sat beside them. Thea found herself directed to the front seat, next to Finn. As they prepared to depart, Thea took one last look at the cabin that had sheltered them from the storm. "Thank you," she said again, unable to find more adequate words. Finn nodded, his expression giving away nothing of what he might be feeling. "Let's get you folks to Kingston." The journey was beautiful but arduous. Finn's route took them through stands of pine trees heavy with snow, across meadows that glittered like fields of diamonds in the winter sunlight, and along narrow paths that hugged the contours of the hills. Throughout, he handled the horses with a quiet confidence that Thea found increasingly admirable. They spoke little at first, both seemingly content with the silence and the spectacular scenery. But as the morning wore on, Thea found herself wanting to know more about this enigmatic man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. "How did you learn so much about horses?" she asked. Finn glanced at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "My father raised them. I was riding before I could walk, according to family legend." "Where is your family now?" His expression sobered. "Gone. Parents died of fever when I was 16. Brother didn't make it back from Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Thea said softly, understanding all too well the ache of loss. Finn nodded, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it. "What about you? Just your uncle left." "And an aunt in Boston, though we've never been close," Thea replied. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me alone." "He must have been a good man to raise a daughter with such spirit," Finn observed. Thea smiled at the unexpected compliment. "He was. He believed women were just as capable as men, given the same opportunities. He taught me everything he knew about medicine, even when others disapproved." "Smart man," Finn said approvingly. The conversation flowed more easily after that, ranging from their favorite books. Thea was surprised to learn Finn had a well-thumbed copy of Wordsworth's poetry, to their views on the rapid changes happening in the West. Both were ambivalent about the coming railroad. By midday, when they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and biscuits, Thea felt as if she'd known Finn Abbott for years rather than days. There was an ease between them that defied explanation, a sense of recognition that went beyond words. As they prepared to continue their journey, Finn helped Thea back onto the sleigh, his hands lingering briefly on her waist. The touch, though brief, sent a current of awareness through her that left her momentarily breathless. "All right?" he asked, his blue eyes searching hers. "Yes," she managed, though she wasn't sure it was entirely true. Nothing about her reaction to this man seemed entirely all right or explainable. The afternoon brought them closer to Kingston, the landscape gradually changing as they descended from the hills. Thea found herself watching the position of the sun with growing apprehension, each minute bringing them nearer to their destination and the inevitable parting that would follow. "Will you stay in Kingston overnight?" she asked as the first outlying buildings came into view. Finn shook his head. "Need to get back to the horses. If the weather holds, I can make it home by midnight." Disappointment settled heavily in Thea's chest. "I see." Finn glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Your uncle's house, do you know where it is?" "Yes, on Cherry Street, near the church." He nodded, guiding the horses toward the center of town. Kingston was a relatively prosperous mining town, with sturdy wooden buildings lining the main street and a surprising number of people out and about despite the snow. Several stopped to stare as the sleigh passed, clearly curious about the unexpected arrivals. Cherry Street was a quieter residential lane off the main thoroughfare, lined with modest but well-maintained homes. Thea directed Finn to a 2-story white house with green shutters near the end of the street. As the sleigh came to a stop, the front door of the house opened, and an older gentleman with graying hair and spectacles hurried out, his face breaking into a relieved smile when he saw Thea. "Uncle Walter," Thea called, waving. Dr. Walter Campbell rushed down the path, heedless of the snow. "Thea, thank God, we've been frantic with worry. Word reached us yesterday about the stagecoach accident. They said there were no survivors. The driver and messenger were killed," Thea explained as her uncle helped her down from the sleigh. "We would have died too if not for Mr. Abbott." She turned to introduce Finn, only to find him already climbing down, his expression once again closed and unreadable. "Mr. Abbott, this is my uncle, Dr. Walter Campbell. Uncle Walter, this is Finn Abbott. He saved our lives." Dr. Campbell grasped Finn's hand warmly. "Sir, I am eternally in your debt. Please, you must come inside, all of you," he added, noticing the other passengers. "I should get back," Finn said, his eyes meeting Thea's briefly. "Horses need tending." "Nonsense," Dr. Campbell insisted. "At least stay for a hot meal and allow me to offer you proper thanks. The horses can rest in my stable." For a moment, Thea thought Finn would refuse, but then he nodded curtly. "Just for a meal, then." Inside, Dr. Campbell's housekeeper, Mrs. Larson, fussed over the travelers, providing hot tea and fresh clothes while Dr. Campbell examined Mrs. Abernathy's ankle and Mr. Hollister's head wound. "You did a fine job with these injuries, Mr. Abbott," Dr. Campbell said approvingly. "Where did you learn such skills?" "Army," Finn replied briefly, standing somewhat awkwardly by the fireplace, as if uncertain of his place in this domestic scene. Thea, freshly changed into a clean dress borrowed from Mrs. Larson, watched him from across the room. He seemed different here in town, more guarded, his shoulders tense beneath his worn coat. Dinner was a lively affair, with Mrs. Abernathy recounting the crash and rescue in dramatic detail to an appreciative Dr. Campbell. Mr. Porter added his own observations, while Mr. Hollister, still suffering from headaches, contributed occasionally throughout the meal. Thea was acutely aware of Finn's quiet presence at the end of the table. He spoke when spoken to but volunteered little, his eyes frequently finding hers across the candle-lit space. After dinner, Mr. Porter and Mr. Hollister took their leave, both having arranged lodging at the hotel in town. Mrs. Abernathy accepted Dr. Campbell's offer to stay until her ankle healed, settling gratefully into the guest room downstairs. Finn, true to his word, prepared to depart immediately after the meal. Thea followed him out to the stable, where he was checking the harnesses on his horses. "You really mean to travel all the way back tonight?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Finn nodded, not looking up from his task. "Better to get over the pass before the weather turns again. Will you come back to Kingston?" The question escaped before she could consider its implications. Now he did look at her, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Do you want me to?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Yes," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I would like to see you again." Finn straightened, his expression softening. "Then I'll come back, when," he considered for a moment, "got some business to attend to at the ranch. Could be here week after next." 2 weeks seemed an eternity, but Thea nodded, trying not to show her disappointment at the delay. "I'll look forward to it." Finn stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Theodora," he said softly, her name like a caress on his lips. "Yes," she whispered, her heart thundering in her chest. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and despite all propriety, she found herself hoping he would. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers feather light against her skin. "Be careful who you smile at in town," he said, with a hint of that almost smile she was coming to cherish. "Might give some poor fellow the wrong idea." Before she could respond to this unexpected teasing, he stepped back, breaking the moment. "Should get going." Thea watched as he climbed onto the sleigh, gathering the reins in his capable hands. "Safe journey, Finn Abbott," she called as he turned the horses toward the street. He touched the brim of his hat in salute, his eyes holding hers one last time. "Week after next, Miss Campbell, you have my word." As the sleigh disappeared into the darkness, Thea stood in the cold, her thoughts in turmoil. In just 3 days, her life had changed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The stagecoach accident, terrifying as it had been, had brought into her life a man unlike any she'd ever known, a man who wrote poetry about mountains and tended injured strangers with gentle hands, who lived alone but seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had. 2 weeks, she thought, turning back toward the warm light of her uncle's house. She could wait 2 weeks. The days passed more slowly than Thea could have imagined possible. She settled into life in Kingston, assisting her uncle in his practice and getting to know the townspeople. Dr. Campbell was well respected in the community, and as his niece, Thea was warmly welcomed everywhere she went. She visited Mrs. Abernathy daily, pleased to see the older woman recovering well under her uncle's care. They often spoke of the accident and their miraculous rescue, and Thea found herself treasuring these conversations as a tangible connection to the hours she'd spent with Finn. "He's a remarkable man, your Mr. Abbott," Mrs. Abernathy observed one afternoon as Thea adjusted her pillows. "He's not my Mr. Abbott," Thea protested, though she couldn't prevent the color that rose to her cheeks. Mrs. Abernathy smiled knowingly. "Perhaps not yet, my dear, but I saw the way he looked at you in that cabin." Thea busied herself with straightening the bedcovers. "And how was that?" "Like a man seeing sunshine after a long winter," Mrs. Abernathy said simply. The words stayed with Thea, warming her during the long days of waiting. She found herself watching the road whenever she went into town, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar figure on horseback. Each day that passed without his appearance brought a small pang of disappointment, though she tried to tell herself she was being foolish. Finn had said week after next, and she had no reason to doubt his word. On the 12th day after his departure, Thea was helping her uncle with inventory in his small dispensary when Mrs. Larson burst into the room, her usually calm demeanor distinctly ruffled. "There's a cowboy at the door asking for Miss Thea," she announced, eyebrows raised significantly. "Rather rough-looking fellow, though he's taken off his hat politely enough." Thea's heart leapt. "Did he give his name?" "Abbott," he said. "Finn Abbott." Dr. Campbell looked up from his ledger with interest. "Ah, your rescuer returns. Show him in, Mrs. Larson." "Into the parlor," the housekeeper specified primly, clearly not approving of receiving such a visitor in the dispensary. Thea resisted the urge to run to the parlor, instead forcing herself to walk at a dignified pace. When she entered the room, Finn was standing by the window, his back to the door. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the sight of him real, not just a memory or a dream, made her breath catch. He was dressed much as he had been before in practical frontier clothing, but his shirt was clean, his hair freshly cut, and he'd trimmed his beard to a neater length. In his hands he held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "You came back," Thea said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. Finn's expression warmed. "Gave my word, didn't I?" They stood looking at each other for a long moment, neither quite knowing how to bridge the distance that 12 days and social propriety had placed between them. "How was your journey?" Thea asked finally, gesturing for him to sit. "Good, weather held." He sat across from her, the package still in his hands. "And you, settling in all right?" "Yes, though Kingston feels very different from San Francisco, smaller, everyone knows everyone else's business." Finn nodded, a shadow of amusement crossing his face. "Including the business of a young lady who receives visits from strange cowboys." Thea smiled. "You're hardly strange to me, Finn Abbott." Something flickered in his eyes at that, a warmth that made her heart beat faster. "Brought you something," he said, holding out the package. Surprised, Thea accepted it. "What is it? Open it and see." She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she found pages covered in neat, masculine handwriting poems, just as he'd told her about in the cabin. "Your poetry," she breathed, deeply touched by the gift. Finn looked almost embarrassed. "Like I said, not good poetry, but I thought, well, you said you'd like to read it someday." Thea ran her fingers reverently over the pages. Thank you, I'll treasure it." Before he could respond, Dr. Campbell entered the parlor, greeting Finn warmly. "Mr. Abbott, a pleasure to see you again. I trust your journey was uneventful." "Yes, sir," Finn replied, standing respectfully. "Excellent, excellent. Will you be staying in Kingston long?" Finn glanced at Thea. "Just overnight. Have business at the land office tomorrow." "Then you must dine with us this evening," Dr. Campbell insisted. "And no arguments about imposing we owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Finn looked as if he might protest, but a look from Thea silenced him. "Thank you, sir. That's very kind." After Dr. Campbell excused himself to return to his patients, Thea found herself alone with Finn again. "Land office?" she inquired curiously. Finn shifted slightly, as if uncomfortable with the topic. "Looking into a parcel near town, good grazing land. You're thinking of moving closer to Kingston." Thea couldn't keep the hopeful note from her voice. "Might be," he acknowledged, his eyes steady on hers, "if I had a reason to." The implication hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Thea felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. "I think that would be a very good thing." The evening was one of the most pleasant Thea could remember. Finn proved surprisingly conversational at dinner, engaging Dr. Campbell in a discussion about local politics and Mrs. Abernathy in a lively debate about the merits of various horse breeds. Even Mrs. Larson, initially skeptical of their rough-hewn guest, was won over when Finn fixed a loose hinge on the kitchen door that had been bothering her for months. Throughout the meal, Thea found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Finn, noticing how the candlelight softened his weathered features, how his hands moved expressively when he was making a point, how his rare laugh transformed his face entirely. After dinner, Dr. Campbell was called away to attend a patient, and Mrs. Abernathy retired early, leaving Thea and Finn alone in the parlor. For a moment, an awkward silence fell between them. "Would you like to walk a bit?" Thea suggested impulsively. "It's a clear night, and the streets are quiet now." Finn hesitated. "Your uncle would trust me to take a short walk with the man who saved my life," Thea finished for him, already reaching for her shawl. Outside, the night was cold but not unbearably so, the sky a vast canopy of stars above them. They walked in companionable silence for a time, their breaths forming small clouds in the frosty air. "I've been reading your poems," Thea said eventually. "They're beautiful, Finn. The way you describe the mountains, the changing seasons, it's as if you see things others miss." Finn looked embarrassed but pleased. "Just thoughts that come to me sometimes. When the light hits the snow a certain way or when the wind sounds like it's talking. Sounds foolish saying it out loud. Not foolish at all," Thea assured him. "It's a gift, being able to put those feelings into words." They had reached the small town square, deserted at this hour. Finn stopped, turning to face her. "There's something I need to say, Theodora." The seriousness of his tone made her heart quicken. "Yes." "I'm not a man of means," he began carefully. "I live simply, always have. The land I'm looking at, it's not much compared to what you might be used to." "Finn," she started, but he held up a hand, asking her to let him finish. "I know we haven't known each other long. Most would say it's madness what I'm feeling, but since that day in the snow when I pulled you through that window and saw your face." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I haven't been able to think of much else." Thea felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with her shawl. "And what is it that you're feeling, Finn Abbott?" He took a step closer, his eyes intent on hers. "That I want to know you better. That I want to see if what I think might be between us is real, or just something born of unusual circumstances." "And if it is real," Thea whispered. Finn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he gently traced the line of her cheek with his fingertips. "Then I'd want to court you properly, if you'd allow it." Thea leaned slightly into his touch, her heart full to bursting. "I would allow it very much." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning, a mere brush of his lips against hers. Thea had been kissed before twice, both times by earnest young medical students in San Francisco, but never like this. Never in a way that made her feel as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Finn drew back, his eyes searching hers for any sign of regret or uncertainty. Finding none, he smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face and made Thea's heart turn over in her chest. "Should get you back," he said softly. "Before your uncle sends out a search party." Thea laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Yes, I suppose we should." As they walked back toward Cherry Street, Finn's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, a promise, perhaps, of more to come. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes. Finn purchased the land he'd been considering, 15 acres just outside Kingston with a small but sturdy cabin and good pasture for horses. He traveled back to his original homestead to settle his affairs and bring his horses to their new home, a journey that took nearly 2 weeks. During his absence, Thea threw herself into her work with her uncle, trying to distract herself from counting the days until Finn's return. Dr. Campbell, observing his niece's obvious distraction, broached the subject one evening as they sat reviewing patient notes. "This young man of yours," he began carefully. "Abbott, he seems a decent sort." Thea looked up, surprised by her uncle's directness. "Yes, I believe he is." "His intentions, are they honorable?" Despite herself, Thea smiled at the old-fashioned phrasing. "Very much so, Uncle Walter." "He's asked to court me properly." Dr. Campbell nodded approvingly. "Good, good. I'd hate to have to shoot the fellow after he went to all the trouble of saving your life." "Uncle Walter," Thea exclaimed, then saw the twinkle in his eye and realized he was teasing her. Her uncle's expression softened. "I just want you to be happy, Thea. Your father would have wanted that too." "I think I could be very happy with Finn," Thea said softly. "He's different from anyone I've ever known." "The best ones usually are," Dr. Campbell replied sagely. When Finn returned to Kingston, it was with his horses, his few possessions, and a determination to make a success of his new venture. He began training horses for the local Stagecoach company, his reputation for gentle but effective methods spreading quickly. True to his word, he courted Thea properly. There were rides into the countryside on clear days, dinners at her uncle's house, and walks through town that inevitably ended with lingering goodbyes on the porch of Dr. Campbell's house. They attended church together on Sundays, causing a flurry of whispers among the congregation, and Finn even escorted Thea to a dance at the town hall, though he claimed to have 2 left feet and spent most of the evening watching her dance with others with a possessive gleam in his eye. Through it all, they talked about books and poetry, about their hopes and fears, about the past that had shaped them, and the future they were beginning to imagine might include each other. Thea learned that Finn had been a lieutenant in the Union Army, that he'd been wounded at Cold Harbor, that he'd come west after the war seeking solitude and a place to heal from all he'd seen. She told him about her mother's early death, about her father's unconventional decision to educate his daughter in medicine, about her dreams of someday becoming a doctor in her own right. Each revelation brought them closer, each shared confidence strengthening the bond that had begun in that snow-bound cabin. 3 months after Finn's return to Kingston, on a warm spring evening, he invited Thea to dinner at his cabin. It was the first time she'd visited his new home, and she was touched by the evident care he'd taken to prepare for her arrival. Wildflowers in a jar adorned the table, the cabin was spotlessly clean, and he'd prepared a surprisingly excellent meal of venison stew and fresh bread. After dinner, they sat on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Finn seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous, his fingers tapping restlessly on the arm of his chair. "Is something wrong?" Thea asked eventually. Finn shook his head, then stood abruptly. "Walk with me." Curious, Thea followed him down a path that led to a small rise overlooking the property. The view was spectacular rolling meadows giving way to pine-covered hills, with the mountains beyond. "This is beautiful," Thea said, understanding why he'd chosen this spot. "Been thinking about building a house here," Finn said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Something bigger than the cabin, with a proper parlor, maybe a study." "That sounds lovely," Thea replied, wondering at his sudden interest in architecture. "Would need a bigger kitchen too," he continued, still not looking at her, "and more bedrooms for children." Thea's heart began to beat faster as the direction of his thoughts became clear. Children. Now Finn turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Theodora Campbell, I'm not a man who finds words easily, except maybe when I'm writing about mountains and such, but I need to say this right." He took her hands in his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "I love you. I think I've loved you since I pulled you out of that stagecoach window and saw your face for the first time. I know it hasn't been long by most people's reckoning, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Thea's eyes as joy welled up within her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Finn Abbott, I will marry you." His face lit up with a smile that took her breath away. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Thea marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a blizzard-bound stagecoach to a hilltop bathed in sunset light. When he kissed her, it was with a passion that spoke of promises kept and a future filled with possibility. Thea wound her arms around his neck, returning the kiss with equal fervor, secure in the knowledge that she had found her home not in San Francisco or Kingston, but in the arms of this remarkable man. The wedding took place in June of 1869, a simple but joyful affair in Kingston's small church. Dr. Campbell gave the bride away, his eyes suspiciously moist behind his spectacles. Mrs. Abernathy, fully recovered from her injury, cried openly throughout the ceremony, declaring it the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed. Even Mr. Porter and Mr. Hollister returned to Kingston for the occasion, bearing gifts and well wishes for the couple whose lives had become so unexpectedly entwined with theirs. Finn, standing tall and proud in a new suit, looked almost unrecognizable from the solitary cowboy who had pulled Thea from the stagecoach window just 5 months earlier. But his eyes, when they met hers across the altar, were the same that startling blue that had captivated her from the first. Thea wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Larson had helped her make, with sprigs of wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. As she spoke her vows, she felt a sense of rightness, of completion, as if her entire life had been leading her to this moment, to this man. The reception was held at Dr. Campbell's house, the garden transformed with lanterns and ribbons for the occasion. As the afternoon turned to evening, Finn led Thea away from the festivities, both of them eager to begin their life together in the cabin that would be their home until the house on the hill was built. As they rode away in a wagon festooned with flowers and good luck charms, Thea leaned against her new husband's shoulder, overcome with happiness. "Mrs. Abbott," Finn said, testing the sound of her new name, "has a nice ring to it." Thea smiled up at him. "Indeed it does, Mr. Abbott." He glanced down at her, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something, Thea. That day in the blizzard when I found your coach, I almost didn't stop." Surprised, Thea sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Finn's hands tightened on the reins. "Was tired, cold. Thought maybe it was just an abandoned coach, no survivors. For a moment I considered riding on." "What made you stop?" Thea asked softly. "Something, I don't know, a feeling, like I was supposed to be there." He shook his head as if embarrassed by the admission. "Never been one for believing in fate or such, but that day, it was like something was pulling me toward that overturned coach." Thea laid her hand on his arm, deeply moved. "I'm very glad you listened to that feeling." Finn covered her hand with his wedding ring gleaming in the fading light. "Best decision I ever made." As they approached the cabin, now adorned with a fresh coat of paint and curtains Thea had sewn herself, Finn surprised her by pulling the wagon to a halt and jumping down. Before Thea could ask what he was doing, he had come around to her side and lifted her bodily from the seat. "Finn," she exclaimed, laughing as he carried her toward the cabin. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my wife over the threshold," he replied with mock seriousness. "It's tradition." "Since when do you care about tradition?" Thea teased, her arms around his neck. Finn's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Since I found a tradition I like." Inside, the cabin had been transformed with Thea's touch curtains at the windows. A colorful quilt on the bed, books, and small treasures arranged on shelves Finn had built. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, and as Finn set her gently on her feet, Thea felt a surge of love for this place and the life they would build here together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Abbott," Finn said softly, his hands cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Home," Thea repeated, the word filled with promise and possibility. "I like the sound of that." In the years that followed, the Abbott homestead flourished. The house on the hill was built, a handsome two-story structure with a wraparound porch and windows positioned to catch the best views of the mountains. Finn's horse training business grew steadily, his methods and results earning him a reputation that spread throughout the territory. Thea continued to assist her uncle in his practice, gradually taking on more responsibilities as Dr. Campbell began to consider retirement. She also established a small medical station at the homestead, treating neighbors and ranch hands for everything from minor cuts to broken bones. Though she never received formal medical training, her knowledge and skills earned her the respect of the community, who began referring to her as Doc Thea despite her lack of official credentials. Their first child, a son they named James Walter Abbott after both their fathers, was born in the spring of 1871. Finn, who had faced Confederate artillery with unwavering courage, paced the hallway outside their bedroom in abject terror until Dr. Campbell emerged with the news that mother and child were doing splendidly. When Finn first held his son, his hands trembling slightly with the responsibility of this tiny new life, Thea saw tears in his eyes, the first she'd ever witnessed. "He's perfect," Finn whispered, touching the baby's tiny fingers with reverent gentleness. "Just like his mother." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Lillian Rose, who inherited her father's startling blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Watching Finn with their children patient, tender, fiercely protective only deepened Thea's love for him. Life on the frontier was never easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, illnesses and injuries, the constant work of maintaining a home and business in a land that demanded resilience. But through it all, Finn and Thea faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing year. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Finn surprised Thea with a gift, a new leather-bound journal filled with poems he had written for her over the years. Some were about the day they met, others about their children, still others about the simple moments of their shared life that he treasured most. "You've never stopped writing," Thea said, touched beyond words as she turned the pages. Finn shrugged, that hint of shyness still present even after years of marriage. "Have more to write about now." As they sat on the porch of their home that evening, watching their children play in the yard below, Thea reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A blizzard, a crashed stagecoach, a broken window, and a cowboy's strong hands pulling her to safety, such small things in the grand scheme of life, yet they had altered her destiny completely. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked, his arm around her shoulders. Thea leaned into his embrace, content in a way she had never imagined possible before meeting him. "About that day in the snow, how close we came to never knowing each other." Finn's arm tightened around her. "Don't like to think about that, nor do I," Thea admitted. "But it makes me grateful every day that you found us, that you broke that window and pulled me through." Finn was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the mountains that had become as familiar to Thea as they were to him. "Know something funny," he said finally. "All those years I spent alone up in those hills, I thought that was what I wanted. Peace, quiet, no one to answer to but myself." He turned to look at her, his expression soft with an emotion that still made Thea's heart race after all these years. "Never knew what I was really looking for until I found you." Thea reached up to touch his face, now weathered by sun and wind, but still, to her, the most beloved face in the world. "And I never knew what I was missing until a cowboy broke a window and pulled me through." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors Finn had once described in his poetry, they sat together in the comfortable silence of two people who had found in each other something rare and precious, a love born in the unlikeliest of circumstances, tempered by challenge and time, and all the stronger for it. In the distance, James and Lillian laughed as they chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, their voices carrying clearly in the evening air. Soon they would need to be called in for supper, baths, and bedtime stories. Tomorrow would bring its own tasks and challenges, its own moments of joy and worry. Life would continue to unfold in all its complexity. But for now, in this perfect moment, Thea Abbott sat beside the man who had rescued her in more ways than one, surrounded by the life they had built together, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, at last and forever, in the arms of her cowboy. 10 years after their wedding, Kingston had grown into a prosperous town with a railway station, several hotels, and a proper school where James and Lillian received their education. The Abbott homestead had expanded to include more land, a larger stable for Finn's growing horse training business, and a dedicated building that served as Thea's clinic. On a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods that lined the drive, Thea stood on the porch watching a familiar figure on horseback making his way up the hill. Even after all these years, the sight of Finn returning home made her heart lift with joy. He dismounted with the same fluid grace he'd always possessed, though there were now strands of silver at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. To Thea, these changes only made him more handsome, adding character to a face she knew better than her own. "You're back early," she said as he climbed the steps and planted a kiss on her lips, a greeting that had never become routine despite thousands of repetitions. "Finished the training session quicker than expected," Finn replied, his arm sliding around her waist as they turned to enter the house. "That Morgan horse is the smartest animal I've ever worked with, took to the commands like he was born knowing them." Inside, the house was quiet, the children still at school. Finn hung his hat on the peg by the door, a gesture so familiar it made Thea smile, and followed her into the kitchen where she had been preparing preserves. "Letter came for you," she said, nodding toward the table where an envelope lay. "From San Francisco." Finn picked it up curiously, breaking the seal. As he read, his expression changed from interest to astonishment. "What is it?" Thea asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's from a publisher," Finn said, looking up with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Someone sent them my poems, the ones about the West, the mountains, the changing seasons. They want to publish them in a book." Thea beamed, not at all surprised by this development. "That's wonderful, Finn. Your poetry deserves to be shared." Finn was still staring at the letter. "But who would have sent them my poems? I've never shown them to anyone but you and the children." Thea busied herself with the preserves, suddenly very interested in ensuring the perfect consistency of the apple butter she was stirring. Perhaps it was someone who appreciates beautiful writing. Finn narrowed his eyes, a smile tugging at his lips. "Theodora Abbott, did you send my poems to a publisher without telling me? I might have made a copy of some of your work," Thea admitted, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "And I might have sent it to an editor I know through my father's connections in San Francisco, but only because they're too good to remain hidden in journals on our bookshelf." For a moment, Finn was speechless, an unusual state for a man who, while never loquacious, always knew his mind. Then he crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, took the wooden spoon from Thea's hand, placed it carefully on the counter, and pulled her into his arms. "Have I told you lately that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known?" he murmured against her hair. Thea laughed, her arms going around his waist. "Not since yesterday, I believe. An oversight I'll need to correct more frequently," Finn said, tipping her face up to his. The kiss that followed was as tender as it was passionate, a testament to a love that had only deepened with the passage of time. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Thea touched his cheek gently. "I'm proud of you, Finn Abbott. Always have been, always will be." The pride was mutual. Over the years, Thea had continued her medical work, eventually receiving formal recognition from the Territorial Medical Board based on her experience and the recommendation of several physicians, including her uncle. Though still not officially a doctor by the strict standards of Eastern medical schools, Doc Thea was the person most Kingston residents trusted with their health and that of their families. Their children were thriving as well. James, now 9, had inherited his father's affinity for horses and his mother's quick mind. He spent every moment he could in the stables, absorbing Finn's lessons about horsemanship and care. Lillian, at 7, was already showing an interest in medicine, following Thea around the clinic and asking endless questions about the human body and how it worked. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Finn shared the news about the publishing offer. The children's excitement was immediate and vocal. "Pa's going to be famous," James declared, his freckled face alight with pride. "Can I tell my teacher?" Lillian asked, bouncing in her seat. "Miss Winters reads us poetry sometimes. Maybe she'll read yours, Pa." Finn looked slightly overwhelmed by the idea of his private thoughts being read in classrooms, but he smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "If the book actually gets published, Lil, you can tell anyone you like." Later, after the children were in bed, Finn and Thea sat on the porch swing, a nightly ritual whenever the weather permitted. The sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds on velvet, the air carrying the scent of pine and approaching winter. "Remember our first winter together?" Thea asked, her head resting comfortably on Finn's shoulder. "How could I forget?" Finn replied, his arm around her, keeping her warm against the evening chill. "You insisted on riding with me to every outlying homestead after that big snowstorm in January, checking on folks who might be in need of medical attention." Thea smiled at the memory. "You were so protective, worrying about me getting too cold or too tired. Still am." "Still do," Finn admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I still love you for it," Thea said softly, "even when it drives me to distraction." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently beneath them. These quiet moments together had become precious over the years, a respite from the busy life they led. "I've been thinking," Finn said eventually, his voice thoughtful, "about what you said years ago about wanting to establish a proper hospital for Kingston." Thea glanced up at him, surprised. It had been a dream she'd mentioned occasionally, but had set aside as impractical given the town's size and resources. With the railway bringing more people to the area and the mines expanding north of town, there's going to be need for more medical care, Finn continued. "Your clinic is already busier than you can manage alone." "What are you suggesting?" Thea asked, sitting up straighter. "That maybe it's time to revisit that dream of yours," Finn said simply. "I've been putting aside some money from the horse training. With the book advance the publisher is offering, and maybe some investment from other folks in town who have benefited from your doctoring over the years. Well, it might be enough to start something." Thea felt a surge of emotion, her eyes filling with unexpected tears. After all these years, Finn still found ways to surprise her with his thoughtfulness, his unwavering support of her aspirations. "You've been planning this," she said, not a question but a statement. Finn shrugged, a gesture so characteristic it made Thea smile despite her tears. "Been considering it. Kingston's growing, needs a proper hospital, needs you at the helm of it." "It would be a tremendous undertaking," Thea mused, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We'd need more trained nurses, equipment, supplies." "One step at a time," Finn advised, in the practical manner that had seen them through many challenges over the years. "Start small, build as needed." Thea leaned up to kiss him, pouring into the gesture all the love and gratitude that words seemed inadequate to express. "Have I told you lately that you're the most remarkable man I've ever known?" She echoed his earlier words. Finn's eyes crinkled at the corners, that same smile that had first captured her heart still capable of making it skip a beat. "Not since this morning, I believe." As winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, the Abbott family's life continued to evolve. Finn's book of poetry, Frontier Reflections, was published to modest but appreciative reviews, earning him a small measure of recognition in literary circles and a great deal of gentle teasing from his horse training colleagues. The hospital project moved forward as well, with land purchased on the edge of Kingston, and construction beginning on a simple but well-designed building that would serve as both hospital and training center for nurses. Thea threw herself into the planning, drawing on her years of experience and the knowledge she'd gained from her father and uncle. In the midst of these new ventures, life presented them with another surprise. Thea, at 34, discovered she was expecting their third child. The news was received with joy by Finn and excitement by James and Lillian, who immediately began debating whether they would prefer a brother or sister. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall, but as winter approached, Thea began experiencing complications. Dr. Campbell, now retired but still skilled, prescribed bed rest and careful monitoring. Finn, typically self-sufficient and capable in a crisis, found himself terrified in a way he hadn't been since the war. The possibility of losing Thea, the center of his world for over a decade, left him sleepless and anxious. One night, as a November storm rattled the windows of their bedroom, he sat beside her bed, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of sleep. "I can't lose you," he whispered, more to himself than to her, his voice raw with emotion. "Not you, Thea, I couldn't bear it." Thea's eyes opened, finding his in the dim light from the bedside lamp. "You're not going to lose me, Finn Abbott," she said with a conviction that brooked no argument. "I have far too much left to do in this life, a hospital to run, children to raise, a husband to love for at least another 50 years. Despite his worry, Finn smiled at her determination. It was this quality, this indomitable spirit, that had first drawn him to her as she organized the survivors in that overturned stagecoach, refusing to surrender to fear or cold. 50 years, he teased gently. "That would make us ancient." "And still madly in love," Thea asserted, squeezing his hand. "Now stop worrying and tell me about the hospital. Has Mr. Jensen finished the roof? Finn complied, updating her on the construction progress, grateful for her ability to pull him from his darkest thoughts. As he spoke, Thea's eyes grew heavy again, and soon she was sleeping peacefully, her hand still clasped in his. On a snowy night in early December, Thomas Finn Abbott entered the world after a difficult but ultimately successful birth attended by Dr. Campbell and a midwife from town. The baby was small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that, while newborn blue, already showed signs of changing to the same striking shade as his father's. Holding his newborn son, with Thea tired but radiant in the bed beside him, Finn felt the same overwhelming sense of gratitude and wonder he'd experienced with each of their children. But this time it was tinged with a deeper appreciation for the fragility of life and the precious gift of his family. "He's perfect," Finn said, echoing the words he'd spoken at James's birth. "And so are you," Thea smiled, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "He has your eyes, I think. And your stubbornness, judging by how determined he was to arrive on his own schedule." As if in agreement, little Thomas wrapped his fingers around his father's much larger one, holding on with surprising strength for one so small. "Welcome to the family, Thomas Finn," Thea said softly. "You've been eagerly awaited." The years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and challenges. The Kingston Hospital opened in the spring of 1880, with Thea serving as its administrator and primary physician. Under her guidance, it became known throughout the territory for its progressive treatments and compassionate care. Finn's horse training business evolved into a respected breeding operation, producing horses known for their intelligence, stamina, and even temperament. His poetry continued to find an audience, and a second volume, Homestead Verses, was published to greater acclaim than the first. The Abbott children grew and flourished. James, following in his father's footsteps, developed into a gifted horseman with an intuitive understanding of the animals. Lillian, as passionate about medicine as her mother, announced her intention to attend medical school in San Francisco, a plan her parents wholeheartedly supported. Young Thomas, creative and thoughtful like his father, showed early signs of a literary bent, crafting stories and poems that Finn proudly preserved. Through it all, the love between Finn and Thea remained the cornerstone of their lives, deepening with each passing year, each shared experience, each challenge faced together. On a summer evening in 1889, 20 years after that fateful day in the blizzard, they sat together on the porch of their home. The house had expanded over the years, rooms added as the family grew, but the view remained the same, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the landscape Finn had immortalized in his poetry. 20 years, Thea mused, her hand in his as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Sometimes it seems like just yesterday that you broke that stagecoach window and pulled me through, and sometimes it feels like I've known you forever." Finn lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that had become a habit over the decades, no less tender for its familiarity. "Best thing I ever did, breaking that window," he said, "though at the time I was just trying to save your life." "You did save my life," Thea said softly, "in more ways than one." From inside the house came the sound of laughter. Thomas, now 9, engaged in some game with his visiting cousins, Dr. Campbell's grandchildren by his son. The older children were away, James working at a prestigious horse farm in Kentucky, Lillian in her second year of medical school in San Francisco. "We've been blessed," Finn said, his voice holding a note of wonder that had never diminished over the years. "We have," Thea agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And do you know what the greatest blessing has been?" "What's that?" Finn asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Finding each other," Thea said simply. "All those years ago in the snow." As the last rays of sunlight gilded the landscape, Finn Abbott pulled his wife closer, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a blizzard-bound stagecoach to a life richer and more fulfilling than either of them could have imagined. "I love you, Theodora Abbott," he said, the words spoken countless times over 20 years but never losing their meaning, "And I love you, Finn Abbott," she replied, smiling up at him. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." In that moment, as they sat wrapped in each other's embrace, watching the day give way to evening, they were as they had always been and would always be, two souls who had found in each other not just safety or comfort, but the truest meaning of home.